Hello, and welcome back to Chapter 4 of the BFG. The Cave. The giant ran on, but now a curious change took place in his way of running. He seemed suddenly to go into a higher gear. Faster and faster he went, and soon he was traveling at such a speed that the landscape became blurred. The wind stung Sophie's cheeks, made her eyes water, whipped her head back and whistled in her ears. She could no longer feel the giant's feet touching the ground. She had a weird sensation they were flying. It was impossible to tell whether they were over land or sea. The giant had some sort of magic in his legs. The wind rushing against Sophie's face became so strong that she had to duck down again into the blanket to prevent her head from being blown away. Was it really possible that they were crossing oceans? It certainly felt that way to Sophie. She crouched in the blanket and listened to the howling of the wind. It went on for what seemed like hours. Then all at once, the wind stopped its howling. The pace began to slow down. Sophie could feel the giant's feet pounding once again over the earth. She poked her head up out of the blanket to have a look. They were in a country of thick forests and rushing rivers. The giant had definitely slowed down and was now running more normally, although normal was a silly word to use to describe a galloping giant. He leaped over a dozen rivers. He went rattling through a great forest, then down into a valley, and up over a range of hills as bare as concrete. And soon he was galloping over a desolate wasteland that was not quite of this earth. The ground was flat and pale yellow. Great lumps of blue rock were scattered around, and dead trees stood everywhere, like skeletons. The moon had long since disappeared, and now the dawn was breaking. Sophie, still peering out from the blanket, saw suddenly ahead of her a great craggy mountain. The mountain was dark blue, and all around it the sky was gushing and glistening with light. Bits of pale gold were flying among delicate, frosty white flakes of cloud, and over to one side the rim of the morning sun was coming up red as blood. Right beneath the mountain the giant stopped. He was puffing mightily. His great chest was heaving in and out. He paused to catch his breath. There's a picture of the great mountain that they came up on. You can see it right there. Over here you can see the giant, and he still has little Sophie. Directly in front of them, lying against the side of the mountain, Sophie could see a massive round stone. It was as big as a house. The giant reached out and rolled the stone to one side as easily as if it had been a football, and now, where the stone had been, there appeared a vast black hole. The hole was so large the giant didn't even have to duck his head as he went in. He strode into the black hole, still carrying Sophie in one hand, the trumpet and the suitcase in the other. As soon as he was inside, he stopped and turned and rolled the great stone back into place so that the entrance to his secret cave was completely hidden from outside. Now that the entrance had been sealed up, there was not a glint of light inside the cave. All was black. Sophie felt herself being lowered to the ground. Then the giant let go of the blanket completely. His footsteps moved away. Sophie sat there in the dark, shivering with fear. "He is getting ready to eat me," she told herself. "He will probably eat me raw, just as I am. Or perhaps he will boil me first. Or perhaps he will have me fried. He will drop me like a rasher of bacon into some gigantic frying pan sizzling with fat." A blaze of light suddenly lit up the whole place. Sophie blinked and stared. She saw an enormous cavern with a high, rocky roof. The walls on either side were lined with shelves, and on the shelves there stood row upon row of glass jars. There were jars everywhere. They were piled up in the corners. They filled every nook and cranny of the cave. In the middle of the floor there was a table 12 feet high and a chair to match. Here's a picture of the cavern, of the cave, with all of its many jars. Little Sophie right down here. The giant took off his black cloak and hung it against the wall. Sophie saw that under the cloak he was wearing a sort of collarless shirt and a dirty old leather waistcoat that didn't seem to have any buttons. His trousers were faded green and were far too short in the legs. On his bare feet, he was wearing a pair of ridiculous sandals that, for some reason, had holes cut along each side with a large hole at the end where his toes stuck out. Sophie, crouching on the floor of the cave in her nightie, gazed back at him through thick steel-rimmed glasses. She was trembling like a leaf in the wind, and a finger of ice was running up and down the length of her spine. "Ha!" shouted the giant, walking forward and rubbing his hands together. "What has us got here?" His booming voice rolled around the walls of the cave like a burst of thunder. That's the end of chapter 4. Let's take a look at our quick thought question. Our quick thought question is, why do you think the giant has a secret cave? Why is it secret? What is he keeping it a secret from? Who is he keeping it a secret from? What do you think? Our vocabulary word is the word blurred. He was running so quickly that everything blurred around him. Blurred. Now, if things are blurred, what does that mean if they're blurred? Think about the base word. Our base word would be what? Blur. So if everything was a blur, what does that mean? Unable to be seen clearly. If something is blurred, it's not able to be seen clearly. Think about whenever something is fogged up, like your windshield or your mirror or something like that. It's blurred, unable to be seen clearly. I want us to take a look at that word. So we said that the base word here is the word blur. Blur. That's the word we start with. What did we put on the end of it? What are those things that we put at the end of a word called? A suffix. A suffix. So our suffix on this word is what? Think back to what suffixes are. What can I add to the end of a word? I could add S. I could add ES, ER, ING, or I could add ED. I can add ED. So that is our suffix. But what do I have left? I still have a letter left. Why do I have an extra letter? What do I do with that? Why do I have an extra letter? Let's think about this. So when a word ends with a consonant, vowel, consonant, in order to add our suffix, we double the final consonant. So I had to add an extra R in order to add my ED. Let's take a look at another word. Let's take a look at this word. What do you notice about it? What is the pattern you see? We have consonant, vowel, consonant. So in order to add a suffix, what would I need to do to the word hop? Consonant, vowel, consonant. I'm going to have to double my final consonant and then add my suffix. So I add another P, and then I can add a suffix. I'm going to add the suffix ing this time, and it makes the word hopping. Hopping. Let's look at one more word. tap. What do we notice? What is the pattern? Consonant, vowel, consonant. So that tells my brain that I should do what? Double my final consonant and then add the suffix. And I have the word tapped. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you again tomorrow for Chapter 5.